Hello and welcome to today's Bloomberg BNA webinar titled Documenting Air Quality Analysis and Findings in the NEPA Process. I have just a couple of announcements before we begin. First of all, thank you for attending today's presentation. Questions will not be submitted by telephone. Questions may be submitted at any time via the Q&A pod at the lower right of your screen. Simply type your question and click the icon to the right to submit. Questions will be allowed to accumulate and will be addressed towards the end of the presentation. You will currently see instructions on how to earn credits for attending today's webinar. If you have any questions about continuing education credits, please email us at credits@bna.com. Instructions for downloading your certificate can be found in the Files pod. In order to download CLE credits for attending today's presentation, you must answer all polling questions that are presented throughout the webinar. There is no submit button for multiple choice questions. If you would like to receive CLE credit for attending today's presentation, please make sure to answer the polling question at the end of the program accurately, which will ask for the jurisdiction where you wish to receive credit and your corresponding bar number. Your certificates will be ready to download in your classroom at learning.bna.com in the My Certificates tab, generally within 1 business day of the presentation. Before introducing our speakers, I would like to thank AASHTO for sponsoring today's webinar. AASHTO is a nonprofit, nonpartisan association representing highway and transportation departments in 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. It represents all 5 transportation modes: air, highways, public transportation, rail, and water. Its primary goal is to foster the development, operation, and maintenance of an integrated national transportation system. I would now like to introduce today's speaker. Bill Malley is a partner of the Perkins Coie law firm in Washington, D.C. Bill's practice focuses on helping clients, primarily state, DOTs, and other public agencies, to navigate the planning and environmental review process for major transportation projects. And with that, I would now like to hand the presentation over to Melissa Savage for a few opening remarks. Hi, Melissa. Are you on the line?
So sorry. Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Savage. I'm the director of the Center for Environmental Excellence at AASHTO. I want to welcome everyone to the webinar today, and we'll be covering air quality analysis and the NEPA process for transportation projects. This webinar is sponsored today by AASHTO in cooperation with the Federal Highway Administration. And today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with a copy of the PowerPoint slides from the presentation, along with the practitioner handbook once published to the center's website. And in a few minutes, we'll get started with Bill Malley giving a presentation about the Air Quality Practitioner Handbook that will be published soon. But first, I just wanted to give or say a few words about the center and its products. The Center for Environmental Excellence has been developed by AASHTO in cooperation with the Federal Highway Administration. The center's mission is to promote environmental stewardship and to encourage innovative ways to streamline the transportation delivery process. On our website, we offer a wealth of information for environmental and transportation practitioners. The practitioner handbooks cover a wide range of topics related to environmental issues. The majority of the handbooks focus on project development, and a few cover issues relating to operations and management of transportation systems. They are all posted on our website, along with links to reference materials. There is no charge to download the handbooks. The handbook series was created in 2006 and has since grown to a total of 17 handbooks. In 2016, we updated 7 of the handbooks and also published a new handbook on compliance with Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. The Air Quality Handbook, which is the subject of today's webinar, will be published soon and will be posted at the Practitioner Handbook site on the center's website. So our first presenter today, Bill Malley, is a partner with the Perkins Coie law firm in Washington, D.C. Bill was a co-author of the Environmental Quality Handbook, together with Rich Denbo of Cambridge Systematics. The work group for this handbook included air quality experts from Federal Highway Administration and several state DOTs, as shown on this slide. On behalf of the center, I want to thank all of our work group members for their contributions to the handbook. And following the presentation, Bill Malley will be the moderator for a Q&A session with our panelists, Cecilia Ho of the Federal Highway Administration and Tim Sexton from Minnesota DOT. Cecilia is a team leader for air quality and noise at Federal Highway Headquarters, and Tim Sexton is the Construction and Operations Section Director for Minnesota DOT. Tim also serves on the Air Quality Subcommittee of the AASHTO's Standing Committee on the Environment. Today's webinar is scheduled for 1 hour. The presentation will take approximately 20 to 25 minutes, leaving the remainder of the time for Q&A. And you may have heard earlier, we are accepting questions in that type-in box that you can see there on your screen. And Bill will facilitate the question and answer period. And now, with all of that said, I will turn it over to our presenter, Bill Malley.
Okay, thank you, Melissa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll begin first with a few words about the handbook as a whole, its goal and its target audience, and then in the presentation, I will cover some of the highlights from the handbook before we turn to the Q&A portion. So first, the target audience for this handbook are NEPA practitioners who are responsible for overseeing the management of a NEPA document, reviewing the air quality analysis within that document, and overall coordinating the NEPA process with air quality conformity. Air quality conformity specialists may also find the handbook useful, but of course much of the technical analysis that's involved in air quality conformity is not included in the handbook, given the sort of general level that the handbook addresses. So in terms of the content of the handbook, you'll find in the handbook first kind of a primer, an overview of the basic requirements that apply to the air quality analysis in a NEPA document. And in a sense, it provides kind of the menu of items that at least need to be considered in determining the scope of that document, as you'll see on this slide. It also provides advice, again, at a high level, but advice on deciding what issues to cover, how to coordinate NEPA with air quality conformity determinations, and what to look for when reviewing an air quality analysis in a NEPA document. It also briefly touches on air quality issues to consider after completion of the NEPA process. A few words on what the handbook is not. First and foremost, it's not agency guidance. This is not produced by Federal Highway as a guidance document. It certainly is not a regulation or anything that would impose a requirement. In addition, it's not a detailed compliance manual, so there's certainly a wealth of much more detailed materials that are available, especially with regard to air quality conformity. Also, just in the vein of caveats, it's important to keep in mind that this reflects the requirements and the policies as they exist at this moment in time. As with any regulatory field, these requirements and policies can change, and as they change, it'll be important to pay attention to the latest guidance and interpretations coming from Federal Highway or EPA or other agencies. So I'll turn next to the presentation itself. And actually, before I do that, I'll just note some of those additional information sources that are available both from Federal Highway, from CEQ, and from EPA. So I'll begin first with the basics of NEPA and conformity. And as we turn to this, one thing that I'll note is that while many of these topics individually are addressed in various guidance documents, there isn't necessarily a single compendium that pulls together in one place the various topics that need to be covered in the air quality analysis in the NEPA document. So that's part of the value of the handbook, is trying to pull together in one place the full set of issues that should be addressed in a NEPA document. So I'll walk briefly through the 4 questions that you see on the screen there, starting first with NEPA. If we think about what kind of air quality analysis is needed under NEPA, leaving aside what's required under conformity, which we'll come to in a second, it's useful to start with the basics of NEPA itself, requiring a comparative analysis of the direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts of the alternatives. It also requires documentation of compliance with other legal requirements, whether permitting or consultation requirements. That should be included. And there's the public involvement and agency coordination component. So if you take those principles and apply them to air quality, in terms of effects, air quality analysis would consider the full range of air pollutants that could be produced by that transportation project. And those fall into some different categories. The criteria pollutants, that's the specific set of pollutants for which national ambient air quality standards have been established. There's also mobile source air toxics, a different set. And then more recently, greenhouse gas emissions have been recognized as pollutants in their own right that could be produced by a transportation project, and there's a question of how best to address those effects in a NEPA document. So there's a range of different pollutant types. There's also both the project itself and construction. Construction emissions are reasonably foreseeable. The question of what level of detail they should be addressed in is something to consider. And then NEPA considers indirect and cumulative effects. So that's when you're thinking about the universe of potential effects that may need to be considered for NEPA. Considering indirect and cumulative effects is also something that needs to be on the radar. And then lastly, mitigation. NEPA doesn't require mitigation, but it requires a discussion of mitigation, of potential mitigation where effects are found. So that's also something that needs to be at least considered in determining whether or determining the scope of a NEPA analysis for air quality. If we turn to conformity, it's a fundamentally different kind of legal requirement. It's a prohibition. Fundamentally, it prohibits federal agencies from approving, funding, or otherwise supporting projects that do not conform to a state's plan for achieving the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And in a way, it says to the federal agencies, don't get in the way of the state's efforts to achieve these federally mandated air quality standards. And the key concepts are building blocks that are a part of this legal requirement. Those building blocks involve some jargon that's unique to conformity and that's important for anyone involved in the NEPA process to understand. I've just briefly listed the kind of key concepts here. The National Ambient Air Quality Standards themselves are standards that define the permissible ambient level, meaning the concentration in the air for 6 pollutants, 4 of which are related to transportation. CO, meaning carbon monoxide, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone. Non-attainment areas are simply areas, geographic areas that don't meet those standards. And the state improvement plan is the plan for achieving those standards. And that SIP is established individually for each of the pollutants for which an area is in non-attainment. So while we think of a SIP as a singular thing, or that term may be thought of that way, in fact there are distinct plans for individual pollutants. In a given area could be a non-attainment for multiple pollutants. Conformity is essentially a finding that a federally approved action is consistent with the plan for achieving a given standard. Transportation conformity is a very distinct set of legal requirements that relate to federal highway and FTA projects. And more specifically, there's 2 levels at which that determination is made: the plan and the program within an MPO, and then at the level of an individual project. And the last building block that I'll just briefly touch on is that there are some projects that are exempt from conformity, essentially because they're neutral or positive with regard to air quality. So for those projects, conformity doesn't apply, even if it is in a non-attainment area. Just to turn next to the regional conformity and then the project level. And I mention these not by way of going deeply into these details, but just in terms of understanding how they relate to NEPA. The regional conformity determination is required each time a transportation plan or TIP is updated or amended. Update meaning every 4 years a new plan or TIP is needed. Amendment meaning a project with air quality impacts is added, or potential air quality impacts is added to or taken out of a plan or moved to a different time period within it. There's a fairly substantial process needed in order to make that regional conformity determination. That involves a regional emissions analysis that's carried out by the MPO, ultimately approved by Federal Highway and FTA. And essentially involves a determination that total emissions from all the existing system, taking into account all the projects to be built under that plan or TIP, those total emissions are consistent with the SIP, and more specifically, the emissions budget for the transportation system as defined in the SIP. There's also a separate legal requirement that has to be met, which is that the plan or TIP is fiscally constrained, meaning that there's funding available, or what's called reasonably available for the projects included in that plan and TIP. and there's some nuances to that, but the general concept is that the projects need to have some kind of funding plan behind them so that it is a real plan or TIP. It does not have kind of phantom projects. What's important, I think, to know from a NEPA standpoint is that the project needs to be in that fiscally constrained and conforming plan or TIP before NEPA completion. So that's a critical milestone for the NEPA process. The project level conformity determination piggybacks on that regional conformity determination for projects that are located within an MPO area. And essentially, any non-exempt project that's in a non-attainment or maintenance area needs a project level conformity determination. Again, that needs to be met prior to completion of NEPA. So it's a basic, milestone that has to be met in the NEPA process. And project level conformity really has two components. One, piggybacking on that regional conformity. Essentially, that regional conformity determination needs to be in place. And then secondly, for certain pollutants that have localized effects, a hotspot analysis may be needed. And I'll turn in a moment to what that might involve. One thing that is important to really keep in mind from a NEPA standpoint is that there needs to be an alignment, essentially, between the project definition in NEPA and the project definition in the plan and TIP. And if they're out of sync in some way, then that plan or TIP would need to be amended prior to completion of NEPA. And that can be a source of delay in the NEPA process if, in fact, they're out of sync. The legal buzzword is consistent in design concept and scope. So I'll turn to mobile source air toxics. This is a separate topic altogether from conformity because these are pollutants that are not for which national ambient air quality standards have not been set. They became a NEPA issue as Federal Highway faced lawsuits and other comments regarding the effects of roadways on of road pollution on near roadway populations, and the question was, do we need to look at that in NEPA, at those public health effects? And this was addressed through guidance, which has been updated a number of times, and essentially breaks it down into three types of projects requiring a quantitative analysis of MSATs for projects that are identified under that guidance as having higher potential for meaningful effects on public health. And that the guidance lays out the specific criteria. Importantly, it also has standard language to be included that explains why in the NEPA process it's not possible to connect a given pollutant level to effects on public health. That link in the causal chain is one that is too uncertain to trace in the NEPA process, and there's specific provision of the CEQ regulations under which that is done. With greenhouse gas emissions, this is an area of law that's been in flux. And in a nutshell, we're talking here about emissions of a pollutant that don't have localized effects. It's the global total that matters. It's the global total that can contribute to climate change. And this became a litigation issue in a number of projects. And by and large, Federal Highway had taken the position that this is not required as part of NEPA. And by and large, courts went along with that, at least in the particular context of those cases. Nonetheless, there is guidance now from CEQ that says this should be addressed as part of the NEPA process in some way, with the real question being, is it qualitative or quantitative? And they provided a very broad kind of rule of thumb, which is it depends on the significance of the emissions, but they haven't provided a bright line for determining what significance means in this context. On a separate note, and it's not an air quality issue, that guidance also calls for consideration of the effects of climate change on the project, which could be sea level rise or extreme weather events that are really resilience issues. That's not an air quality issue, but it could be a climate change issue, so it's important to keep those issues distinct. On this slide, I'll just mention a few odds and ends, and this is, I'm sure, a small subset of the odds and ends that can arise with regard to NEPA and air quality. But a couple points to note. One, there are now states that have NEPA assignment under which they take over the role of Federal Highway. Conformity can be assigned under one of those programs, which is the one with categorical exclusions. Conformity cannot be assigned under the full assignment program. tiering, there's a question when tiering is done, when does the conformity decision get made? And by and large, the interpretation has been that it's recorded at the end of Tier 2, the project level document. There's also some situations where there is a non-attainment or maintenance area that's located outside of an MPO boundary, meaning in a rural area. And in those areas, conformity is required, but you don't have that MPO process to piggyback on. There's some unique issues associated with those, but the crux of it is that conformity is still required. It's made at the project level. And so that's something, again, to be alert to. There's an ongoing process to establish a tighter standard for ozone, and if that's established, some additional areas outside of MPO boundaries could become subject to conformity. So I'll turn next to some tips, and again, these are kind of the basics, but they're kind of the core points that are important to keep in mind to keep the air quality analysis on track and to also help to minimize the potential for delays that result from conformity problems delaying the NEPA process. So I'll walk through the list of issues that's covered on the screen and then conclude with an assortment of issues to watch out for to keep in mind as you're going through the NEPA process. So starting with perhaps the first question that should be determined is, what air quality issues will we cover in this NEPA document? And this is, you can think of as sort of choosing from the menu, and it's important to kind of systematically walk through each of the items on this menu, both to determine what specific pollutants need to be covered and also what kind of analysis needs to be done. And so this should be a systematic kind of effort at the outset of the NEPA process or even before that NEPA process begins. For criteria pollutants, and again, these are the pollutants for which national ambient air quality standards have been established, it's important not just to say we are or are not in a non-attainment area or maintenance area, but to drill down and say for which specific pollutants. And sometimes for a given pollutant, there's more than one standard. So drilling down and understanding the specific pollutants that are in question. And then also looking at what kind of analysis will we do? Will we do a kind of a quarter level emissions analysis for each of those pollutants, for the no action and action alternatives? What kind of analysis, comparative analysis, will go into the NEPA document? For mobile source air toxics, it's a matter of slotting the project into one of those three levels of review. And then for greenhouse gases, under that CEQ guidance of making an assessment of qualitative or quantitative analysis. It's also worth thinking about, what do we need to do on construction emissions? Is there some kind of analysis needed? Will it be more qualitative? And then for indirect and cumulative, are there notable issues that we should have on the radar that should be addressed specifically? For example, is there some induced growth that have indirect effects? Is there a major emission source nearby that needs to be addressed as part of a cumulative impacts analysis? Next, conformity determination. A judgment is needed about, do we need a conformity determination? If so, for which pollutants? And this will lead into a schedule question. At the threshold, is this an exempt project? If it is, you don't need a conformity determination. If it's not exempt, you will have to do, you are potentially subject to conformity. And then you look to the question of what, are we in a non-attainment or maintenance area, and if so, for which pollutants? On this point, the subtlety there is, is there anything that may change, that has recently changed or that may change over the course of the NEPA process, and be very clear about what that is. For example, it could be that the MPO has been making conformity determinations, but its status has recently changed, and going forward they will no longer be needed for a given pollutant because it's now in attainment. It could also be that there is an anticipated change that in its status where it will now become non-attainment, say for a new standard, and that while they haven't needed to in the past, they will need to going forward. So having a very clear understanding of that is critical. Similarly, for the project itself, because NEPA piggybacks on the regional determination for the plan and TIP, it's important to understand, is the project already in, and if so, is it in there in a way that's consistent with the project definition in the NEPA process. You may not know that at the outset. And then similarly, are there obstacles that are known to including it? Building on that point, it's important to take a look at the NEPA schedule and try to fit conformity into that schedule, both in terms of the analysis, but equally importantly, the decision-making by the MPO with regard to its plan and TIP. That's a matter of laying down their process, which includes a fairly long lead time often for their plan and TIP updates and amendments, and laying that down next to the NEPA project schedule, and understanding at what point will the project need to be, in a sense, provided to the MPO, a project definition for them to include in the modeling that ultimately leads to a plan and TIP update or amendment. For a project that's already in, the question then becomes, okay, is it consistent in design concept and scope? If not, when will that inconsistency be resolved? And oftentimes when a preferred alternative is identified, there is a difference, and then a change is needed in that plan and TIP, and time needs to be allowed for that amendment to occur. Turning to the review of an air quality analysis in the NEPA document, like any regulatory area, there's jargon associated with it, and precision in the use of that terminology is an important factor in Federal Highways review. And when chapters are sent back with changes from Federal Highway, often it goes to the clarity in the use of that terminology or the completeness in terms of describing the exact conformity status of a given area or the results of the emissions analysis with regard to the pollutants that are subject to conformity. Again, as with any technical topic, being able to present those results in a way that's clear and understandable is often enhanced with visuals or with tables. And one of the important questions to kind of think about and maybe talk with Federal Highway about is, okay, how best to present this technical data so that it's clear what the results are. Equally important here is the idea of documenting not just the environmental impact analysis, but also the compliance with the legal requirement of conformity, because as I mentioned at the beginning, an important part of NEPA is not only the effects analysis, but also documentation of compliance with other legal requirements. So the specific dates on which conformity finding was made, including that information, and then the backup information to show, for example, the correspondence demonstrating that those conformity determinations were made. Also note that important factors avoiding overstating benefits. For example, sometimes it may be believed that a project that reduces congestion will benefit air quality. That may be widely stated or widely believed, but do we have data to show that? Making sure that we only say it if it can be backed up. For a hotspot analysis, I won't go into too much detail on this one. I think the critical points to note are that this is required for only 3 pollutants. There's guidance and regulations regarding those. It's different for CO versus PM. The critical question to focus on is this the kind of project for which a quantitative hotspot analysis is needed? There are criteria laid out for those, both for CO and for PM. Also keep in mind that there is a legal requirement to use the latest planning assumptions and the latest emissions model. Those can change, in making sure that you've not only done that analysis, but also that it meets those specific requirements. So that's in a sense, a heavily regulated type of analysis, and so it requires special attention as you're going through the NEPA process to make sure that it fully complies with all of the regs and guidance. I'll also note that, as you see in the last bullet, there is a categorical CO hotspot determination that applies in CO maintenance areas, so you may be able to qualify for that, and that's one less step needed in the analysis. In terms of issues to consider after NEPA completion, it's good to think of that as having kind of 3 dimensions: the NEPA issue, which is reevaluation or supplementation; the conformity issue of, is there information that could trigger the need for a new conformity determination? And then lastly, the planning process issue, which is the MPO required, because of the expiration of the 4-year period for updating a plan or TIP, to update, to do a plan or tip update, which would then require a conformity determination for all projects in that plan or tip. The air quality technical report is really the backup for everything that's in the EIS. And so you can think of this like any other technical report as being just a building block of NEPA legal sufficiency. It would include all of the sort of standard items, but I think in particular because of the technical nature of air quality analysis, so the methodology and the model used are very important to document very clearly. Now, I know that we're coming up on time for the Q&A panel, so I'll just briefly cover these last two slides. And this is really just a menu of things to think about, or perhaps you could say worry about as you're going through the NEPA process. These are air quality related issues that could cause delay or consternation as you're going through the process. And in a way you can think of it as just what should be on the radar. Changing assumptions on the MPO side, does that have an effect on their air quality analysis? Does that mean something different should be done on the NEPA side? Is there a new model that we release or a new model version? And I won't go through each of the items on the list, but as you can see on the screen here, these are a number of different topics that could trigger a need for a conversation, perhaps with Federal Highway or perhaps with EPA to ensure that the analysis covers what it needs to, or perhaps to modify the scope of the analysis. And you'll see some additional items on this slide as well. So with that, I will conclude the presentation portion of the webinar. I'm going to hand it back to Melissa briefly, and then we will begin the Q&A portion of the webinar.
Thanks, Bill. And as a reminder, you can type in your questions, and we will begin funneling those to our panelists that are on today. And just a friendly reminder that the practitioner handbook that was the topic of this webinar is in process in terms of being published. And as soon as it is ready, we will have that posted online. So just wanted to make that clarification. And with that, Bill, I think we're ready to begin the Q&A.
Great. Super. Thank you very much.
Hi, Bill. This is Cecilia at Federal Highway. Before we start the Q&A session, can I make one clarification?
Absolutely.
I don't know whether it's easy to find to roll back to the slide that talk about donut and isolated rural area.
Let's see. I will try to do that. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that, there's a difference between donut area and isolated rural area. And in EPA's conformity regulation, actually those two type of areas have their own distinct definition. Just to be brief, for donut areas, these are the areas that is the non-attainment areas is outside of the MPO. Then it is not part of the MPO, but they are still part of the non-attainment area that covers the MPO. So for donut areas, actually the regional part of the conformity requirements apply to donut areas. They are not isolated rural areas. So for isolated rural areas, because there's no plan and tip requirements, metropolitan plan and tip requirements for these areas. So the regional part of the conformity requirements do not apply to isolated rural areas. So I just want to make that distinction between these two types of areas.
Okay, thank you. That's a very important clarification. So let's see. I'll pull the slide back to the last screen, and I see we've got a few questions that have come in. And Cecilia, perhaps I'll start with you. The first question was, when we say NEPA, are we talking about all classes of action, including CE? So does conformity, can you talk about how conformity applies in the context of a project that qualifies for a categorical exclusion under NEPA?
Yes, it applies to all classes of NEPA documents, including CEs. But like what Bill talked about before, I mean, some CE projects or some projects, if they are exempt, then those projects are not subject to conformity.
Right. So many but not all exempt projects will qualify for CEs.
Yes.
Okay. The next question, again, I think we're covering some of the kind of the basics of conformity, but these are important distinctions. The next question was projects in attainment or unclassifiable areas. The question was, is conformity not required for projects in attainment or unclassifiable areas?
For projects that are in non-attainment areas, that means they are not non-attainment or maintenance, then conformity does not apply.
Right. Okay. And this term unclassifiable, maybe you can just describe what that means. Is that equivalent to being attainment?
Not necessarily. I would. I mean, if you have questions about the designation, the status of your area, and if you're not sure, I would suggest that you check with your EPA regional office or a state air agency to make it clear that whether that area is subject to conformity or not. Because I think either EPA or your state air agency can answer those questions pretty clearly.
Okay. And Cecilia, I'm going to come back to you for the next question as well. It's another, I guess you could say, regulatory question. The question is it true that only regionally significant projects must be in a plan or TIP?
It is true that all regionally significant projects must be included in the plan and TIP, but it is not the only projects. So if you want to know exactly what should be included in the plan and TIP, I would suggest that you go back and look at the planning regulation, because we have several sessions in the planning regulations. It's very clearly defined what the content of a plan and TIP should be. So I would really encourage folks to take a look at those sections in the planning regulations.
Okay. Let's see. The next question relates to the greenhouse gas guidance, and I think I can answer that one. The question is, what is the status of the CEQ greenhouse gas guidance issued in August 2016? It is no longer available on the CEQ website. And the guidance was issued in the Federal Register. It has not been rescinded, so it remains in effect. The availability of it on the website is not itself, doesn't determine its legal status. It certainly could be rescinded in the future, but as of this point, it has not been. Cecilia, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's the latest that I know of.
Okay. Tim, maybe I'll turn next to you for a question. This question relates to projects that are located near sensitive populations. For example, I'm thinking perhaps a school or nursing home or daycare center. And perhaps, Tim, you could talk about how air quality issues should be addressed under NEPA when a project is located in proximity to sensitive populations.
Sure. So I think this one is a bit of a gray area, at least in my experience, dealing with sensitive populations. One consideration is that if a known environmental justice community is nearby, or some of the examples that Bill mentioned, like daycares, even parks or schools, what I've seen is more typically their concerns regarding mobile source air toxics are more relevant than criteria pollutants, which really don't address, on the criteria pollutant side, whether on conformity or NEPA, there isn't a direct connection to the sensitive populations like there are with the mobile source air toxics. And so I guess in my experience, in 2 different states, we've looked at MSATs according to the Federal Highways interim guidance and applied it to those locations with sensitive populations.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Cecilia, did you have anything further to add or any further thoughts on what you'd be looking for in a NEPA analysis when the project's near a sensitive population?
I don't have a whole lot to add, but I agree with what Tim just said.
Okay. The next question relates to conformity determinations in the context of NEPA assignment. and I think that they're just asking for just a clarification of that point. And what I had mentioned during the presentation was that there's two different assignment programs, and the first one is for categorical exclusions only, and that conformity can be assigned. The other is for what's called full NEPA assignment, and that could include EISs, EAs, and so forth. And that program does not allow for conformity to be assigned. And Susie, I guess I wanted to check with you. Did I get that right, and was there anything further to add to that?
That's correct.
Okay. So the next question had to do with the categorical CO hotspot determination. And Cecilia, maybe I'll turn to you for this question. It was the commenter asked, it's my understanding that it is no longer applicable due to moves 2014. Has this guidance been revised? So is the categorical CO hotspot determination still in effect?
The current one, I mean the commenter is correct. The existing one, because it's based on Move 2010B, so it is no longer valid, the conformity, the categorical finding for the one that is on our website. But we are very close in posting a new categorical finding for CO very shortly, which will include the new moves runs and meet all the requirements. So that will be available very soon.
Okay. Thank you. The next question, what is the CEQ? The CEQ is the Council on Environmental Quality, and that's a federal agency, actually kind of an office within the White House, which issues regulations that govern NEPA compliance for all federal agencies. The next question was, will there be any major changes for EPA regulations in the environmental field for the new administration? We'd all love to know the answer to that question, but I suppose that the reality is that all we know is that it certainly is possible that there will be changes, but we have to kind of react to those changes as they come along. The topics that are covered in today's presentation themselves have not been the subject of any changes at this time. And Cecilia, I'll just check with you. And is there anything further that you have to add on this topic?
No.
Okay. We do not have a crystal ball, at least not available to us today. The next question actually was the same. With the new administration, do you foresee any changes that may moderately or greatly affect current regulatory practices? And again, I think we can certainly say that's possible, but we just don't know, and we'll have to react to it as it comes. The next question was just actually a comment that talked about the word unclassifiable and noted that this is an area where not enough data has been acquired to make a determination. And really, I think that maybe the crux of it is that conformity applies in an area that's actually non-attainment or actually maintenance. So an unclassifiable area would not be either of those two things, and therefore conformity would not apply. The next question, Cecilia, is for you. The commenter noted that you had referred to a planning regulation about types of projects that must be in the plan or TIP, and the commenter asked what document are you referring to. So I'm not sure you have a specific chapter and verse to mention with regard to the planning regs, but did you want to respond to that question at all about where that information can be found?
Sure. It is in 23 CFR section 450, which is the transportation planning and programming regulation. I don't have the full name right in front of me, but that's the planning regulations that I was referring to. If you want to take a look at the section to talk about content of the transportation, there's a section called Development and Content of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is in section 450.322. And if you're interested in looking at the content of the Transportation Improvement Program, which is the TIP, which is in section 450.324.
Okay. Thank you. The next question was really just a request to clarify that a microscale air quality analysis may be required under NEPA even if regional emissions are below or I guess are consistent with conformity, or the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And perhaps the question that this points to is there is guidance, but it's fairly old guidance from Federal Highway and the Technical Advisory that talks about what an air quality analysis should cover. And it does refer to the potential for a microscale as analysis. And Cecilia, perhaps you can describe, are there circumstances where even though a hotspot analysis is not needed for conformity, where Federal Highway might still want to have a microscale air quality analysis for NEPA purposes?
There's not specific requirements right now, except for the technical advisory that's still on the books. And like what you said, Bill, it's very dated because it was developed in the late 80s. For the technical advisory, we are in the process of, updating the TA. So, but I cannot tell you when it will be completed. So, if we're talking about requirements in quote, that is the document a lot of people are referring to. There might be circumstances that the project sponsor or the state DOT wants to do some type of microscale analysis, especially for the locations of the project that you may think that it will provide very significant air quality problems. But for the most part, if you have a significant air quality problem in your area, you will either be non-attainment or maintenance, so you'll be addressing those concerns or those impacts through conformity anyway. So one thing I want to make sure is that even though if you're doing a project level analysis, it is not the same as a hotspot analysis as required in the conformity regulation. So you are not required to meet all the requirements as if you're doing a hotspot analysis for conformity, if you're doing a microscale analysis for NEPA purposes. So, but in terms of the level of details or the type of analysis, every project is different. So. And I hope that the TA update will address those type of issues. But in the meantime, if you have questions about the types of analysis or whether you should or should not be doing analysis, please contact the Federal Highway Division office, and and we'll try to provide you with technical assistance. Okay,
great. Tim, I'll turn to you for the next one. The question has to do with mitigation for mobile source air toxics or greenhouse gas emissions. And I think the general question is, are there publications that talk about how to mitigate MSATs or greenhouse gas emissions? And maybe more generally, if this kind of issue comes up where the commenter, for example, on the NEPA document recommends consideration of mitigation for MSATs or greenhouse gas emissions, what are your thoughts about how that kind of comment could be addressed?
Sure, and Cecilia may have better examples on the mobile source air toxic side, but I believe that California has examples of some of their intermodal freight facilities of actually doing some mitigation related to mobile source air toxics. I think, though, is more related to health risk assessments that often accompany some of their larger projects. But otherwise, I'm not aware of project-level mobile source air toxic or greenhouse gas mitigation documents. I assume they're out there, but I know that in our state, in Minnesota, we're looking more on the program level side of trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mobile source air toxics on a larger planning level versus the project level NEPA document.
Okay, great. Cecilia, anything to add on mitigation for MSATs or GHGs?
There are some general discussions about mitigation as part of in the MSAT guidance, and also there's maybe some discussions on our website, and both for MSAT and the greenhouse gas emissions. So what I can do is I can send a link maybe to Melissa, and then she can maybe share with the group. You can access our website, and and there should be some information on our website.
Okay, great. The next question, this is a technical one, and Cecilia, I'll ask you this, and Tim, you may know. The question was, when will AirMod be required or available for use in CO modeling? And AirMod, I assume, is a model of some kind.
Tim, you want me to start?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think some of you may know that EPA finalized a regulation is commonly known as Appendix W, which is a regulation basically to talk about the recommended model used for air quality analysis, including dispersion model. AirMod is one of the several dispersion models addressed in Appendix W. For CO analysis, especially for mobile sources, EPA really did not change the requirements for use of AirMod. Basically, for screening analysis, you are not required to use AirMod. Actually, you cannot use AirMod because EPA did not make that change. So for screening analysis, for screening CO analysis, you should continue to use Cal 3 QHC as required right now under a separate EPA guidance. So I think that is maybe a short answer to the question. So I think the answer is there's no requirements to use AirMod for CO screening analysis, unless you are doing a more refined analysis for CO, which I have not seen any areas of doing refined analysis. So I think for just for information purposes, for CO type of analysis, that most state DOTs do, you are not required to use AirMod.
All right. Great. Thank you. Next one, Cecilia, I believe is for you as well. The question was, does the updated CO categorical conformity determination retain the same applicability thresholds as the original?
Yes, everything will be the same except for the categorical findings updated by using MOVES 2014. Everything else is the same.
Got it. Okay. Next question was, when will the practitioner's handbook be out on air quality conformity? It's in production. It should be out, I would say, within the next month. The next question related to non-attainment status, and the question is, where could I find information on how an area may become non-attainment? And the questioner notes that there's an adjacent area in a different hydrographic basin than the maintenance area that is becoming a large employment source, and the employment area, that area is currently unclassifiable. So I think what this goes to is how an area could become designated as being in non-attainment. And I know that's a complex topic, but perhaps Cecilia could give kind of the high level of how an area becomes non-attainment, designated as non-attainment.
I think this question actually EPA should be in a much better answer. I'm not sure whether there's any EPA folks on the call. Please feel free to chime in to answer the question. I don't have all the information right in front of me. So if you're interested in getting to know more about the designation process, I've definitely encourage you to take a look at EPA's website. I think they have a lot of information on their website, and also maybe contact your EPA regional office. But in terms of whether you would, how you would find out whether your area is, non-attainment, maintenance, or any other status, EPA, there's a website on EPA, we commonly known as a Green Book, which is where you can find the air quality status of your area, and it is a very useful tool to get that type of information.
And thank you, Cecilia. Now, just to add to that, when there's multiple steps to the process, but just in a nutshell, when a new or revised national ambient air quality standard is established by EPA, that then leads to a process where the states, in the first instance, propose areas that would be designated as non-attainment. Those are submitted to EPA for review, and EPA would ultimately approve those. And then there's also an ongoing air quality monitoring obligation, which could lead to redesignation of an area, either to expand the non-attainment area or to reduce it or to change it to maintenance and ultimately attainment. But if you Google EPA Green Book, you'll see the current status of each area across the country. The next question had to do with limits for MSATs. Essentially, I think this would go to, would there be ambient standards established for mobile source air toxics. My understanding is no, that there is not such an effort, but I don't know, Cecilia, is there anything to add on that? Is there any process underway to establish such thresholds?
No, I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Next question, and again, Cecilia, I think this may be for you. Are there any plans to establish categorical conformity findings for PM 2.5?
Not at this point. No, there needs to be a much bigger effort in terms of establishing a PM 2.5 categorical finding. So, you know, we will take a look at that again, but we are not working on it at this moment.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. The next question had to do with CMAQ performance measures, and I think what this refers to are the performance measures that were required under MAP 21, some of which related to air quality, and ultimately those performance measures were established through a rulemaking. And the question would be, what is the tie-in between those performance measures and the NEPA process? And I don't know that there's an answer to that question, but maybe Tim or Cecilia, you may have some initial thoughts about once those performance measures are in fact implemented, how might they actually be used in the NEPA process?
Well, Cecilia, you can maybe talk about the specifics, but I can just touch briefly on how we've been thinking about this from one state perspective. And that really is, you know, there's NEPA requirements, and a lot of those requirements we really see as sort of the basement on how you address air quality issues in general through NEPA. NEPA is really meant as a public disclosure document to inform the public, and we see this as sort of part of the storytelling is to introduce that information about the performance measures. You know, in particular, we're looking at the greenhouse gas performance measures to help people understand how this project relates to, you know, in this case, state-level greenhouse gas emissions. And the same would be true for CMAQ. If there are projects within the CMAQ projects in the region or in the area as part of the project, we would reference that and help tell that air quality story through NEPA. I don't know if you have anything to add, Cecilia, as far as the requirements and connecting those two to NEPA.
I think I don't quite understand the question, but in terms of the performance measure, especially the one related to CMAQ, you know, the final rule actually is pretty clearly defined what the measures are. So, you know, I don't think I really understand the question. If you know, if the commenter can maybe elaborate it a little bit.
Well, perhaps one way of asking this would be, if a performance measure has been established, say for greenhouse gas emissions, and now it's being reported by the MPO as part of its planning process, is that the kind of information that should then be included in the NEPA air quality analysis, if that information exists for the metropolitan area? And there may not be an answer to that question at this point.
I'm not even sure. I mean, you know, the measure is dealing with individual projects. So, so I think it's really depending on, you know, how the performance measure is addressed in terms of, you know, what the requirements are. But of course, I mean, if you want to disclose that information in your NEPA document, by all means. But you know, I don't think it's a requirement that you have to do it. And you know, like what I said, I mean, you know, some of these measures are not even like, you know, addressing individual projects specifically. So, so I mean, that might be a link, but you know, but definitely, I don't think that is a requirement that you have to include that.
Got it. Okay. And we have one last question. I think it should be very short, Cecilia, for you, I think, and that is, are you aware if EPA is considering expanding the list of exempt projects?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. I see we're right up on the end of the hour. We have actually gotten through all of the questions that were submitted, so thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I wanted to thank Cecilia and Tim for your participation, and I'll hand it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks again to all the panelists and all of our attendees. In closing, I'll just remind everyone that this webinar will be posted on our website, the center's website, and as soon as the practitioner's handbook is finished and published and ready to be posted, it will be up there along with the other practitioner handbooks as well. So with that, I would thank you again for joining us and conclude the webinar. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for your presentation. I hope everyone found today's discussion to be helpful and insightful. You can register for future Bloomberg BNA webinars by accessing our store at www.bna.com/learning. Please go to learning.bna.com to retrieve your certificate. CLE certificates may take 4 to 6 weeks to appear depending on the jurisdiction requested. If you have any questions about continuing education credits, please email us at credits@bna.com. Finally, I want to again thank AASHTO, our speakers, and all of you for your participation in today's webinar. Thanks everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.